Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The White Allies Handbook, 4 Weeks to Join the Racial Justice Fight for Black Women, by Lecia Michelle, read by Julienne Irons. Introduction. Before you begin your journey, I want to dispel some misconceptions about what it actually means to be an ally. As you make your way through this book, you'll notice I repeatedly say allyship means action. Having a Black Lives Matter yard sign, or including a hashtag on your social media account that says #BelieveBlackWomen, doesn't make you an ally. These are just a few examples of passive decisions white people make to convince themselves they're allies, without doing any actual anti-racist work to fight racism. It makes them feel good, and too often those feelings mean more to them than stepping outside of their comfort zone to directly confront racism. When white people make passive decisions about how to address racism, instead of ones that drive real change, they're telling me that they're unwilling to step outside of the comfort of their whiteness to fight for my equality. A small, ineffective gesture is the totality of their brand of allyship. It will never be enough to challenge the status quo and push our equality to the forefront. It's whiteness at work, and it's rampant in this country. We only have to look at American politics to see how entrenched white supremacy and racism are in the United States. The 2020 presidential election is over, and President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris now lead our nation. 4 years of tyranny are over. Or are they? 55% of white female voters cast their ballots for Donald Trump. That's up from 53% in the 2016 election. Nearly 74 million Americans voted to re-elect a man who praised white supremacists and called protesters thugs. They supported a leader who tried to abolish President Obama's Affordable Care Act, even as many of them took advantage of that health coverage. They cast a ballot for a president who never spoke out against police brutality, even after the horrific videotaped death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. They said yes to a president who knew months earlier how deadly COVID-19 could be in our nation and purposely downplayed it. They proudly voted for a man who watched as hundreds of thousands of American citizens died from the virus, many of them Black. After all that, his supporters still wanted him to remain in the Oval Office for another 4 years. His racism and white supremacy didn't deter them. If anything, it spurred them in greater numbers to come out and vote. It also drove thousands of them on January 6, 2021 to attack the Capitol in an effort to help Donald Trump remain in office, even though he lost the election. These people would have murdered members of Congress had they been able to find them that day. Instead, they turned their anger on law enforcement, and many of those who defended the Capitol that day will never be the same. That's where we stand as a nation. This blatant support of racism should be the tipping point for self-described allies. Even if they didn't vote for hatred, they know people who did exactly that. In the midst of all this upheaval, Black people still fight for equal voting rights, a right that white people in this country take for granted. Countless times, I've worked with white people who challenged me when I said that slavery didn't end so much as it evolved. Freed slaves weren't allowed to vote. They couldn't just live anywhere they wanted. Many rented land from white people and worked as sharecroppers. They toiled away for little pay, since everything they needed to farm they purchased on credit. They also lived under the constant threat of violence by the Ku Klux Klan. As a Black woman, I can't stress enough the importance of having white people as allies, so it's important you understand what that word means. Ally is a title we give to white people when we see you using your privilege to actively fight racism. Don't assume you're an ally. The white people I consider allies have done the hard work of confronting racists, even when it's people they love. They understand and expect the discomfort that comes with having those difficult conversations. They've dedicated themselves to becoming effective allies. No amount of reading Black history or quoting Black people brings you any closer to that title. Allyship isn't theoretical. It requires action. While I do want you to read and study about Black people, I also want you to understand that standing up in the face of racism, both explicit and implicit, is what's required of allies. Time and again, white people make lackluster attempts at being allies by participating in marches and quoting passages from books. The turnout for the Women's March was impressive. However, how many white women did any actual ally work once they hung up their pink pussy hats? Now is the time for white people to fully commit themselves to supporting us. That means recognizing their own racism and abolishing it. That also means standing up to racists, especially family and friends. Allyship means fighting against hatred everywhere. That's how we will have any chance of defeating racism in this country. Yes, we voted, and a new administration now sits in the White House, one committed to fighting systemic racism. We also must do our part. The fight against racism isn't won or lost through policy. It's defeated by talking to the very people who protect and support it. White people must initiate those hard conversations with the goal of changing minds or making it impossible for those racists to spew hatred around them without any consequences. I created the White Allies Handbook with the unique purpose of giving white people actionable directions they can follow on their way to becoming allies to Black women. While books like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, explain why white people are uncomfortable discussing race, they don't provide a clear way to help them break through that barrier. This handbook shows you how to conquer the discomfort and why it's crucial that you succeed. Allyship is a journey, and no matter where you are on that path, this book provides information that will help you become more effective allies. Allyship means you listen to Black women. You believe our stories. You support us anywhere you can. You find opportunities to amplify our voices. You create avenues for our successes. You don't allow white supremacy and white privilege to insinuate their way into any spaces where their presence prevents Black women from receiving an equal chance to excel in life. During the 2016 election, I was searching for a space that supported Hillary Clinton. Like many people, I found the Facebook group Pantsuit Nation. I wanted a community where women like me could talk about all the possibilities for us if this country elected a female president. At the time, the group had close to 4 million people. Most of the posts shared in the group were from people talking about their own personal experiences. However, I noticed that when Black women posted anything remotely related to racism, white members shouted them down. They didn't want to hear it. They only wanted positive stories. They called the Black women divisive and racist. Other Black women, including myself, tried to tell these white people that they were the ones perpetuating racism through their actions. We explained how Black women overwhelmingly supported the Democratic ticket, and it was time the party took our concerns seriously. It fell on deaf ears. Not only did the white members attack us, we received no support from the group's moderators and administrators. The turning point for me was when a Black woman posted a topic specific to the experiences of Black women and asked that only we respond. White members caused an uproar, and the administrators handled the situation poorly. Not only was the original poster harmed by the vitriol, but many Black women who came to her defense also were harmed. I decided right then that I would start my own Facebook group, a safe space for women of color, and a place where white people could learn how to become allies. In December 2016, I created Real Talk, WOC and Allies for Racial Justice and Anti-Oppression. Since then, we've mentored over 1,100 white women on allyship and provided a safe haven for thousands of women of color. The mentoring program gave me the idea to create a resource for white people. The White Allies Handbook provides potential allies with clear, concise information they can use to effectively fight racism with Black women. The market is inundated with books explaining racism and the need for white people to step up and help fight it, but the authors don't show readers how to begin. My handbook gives you a self-directed path to becoming an effective ally. The book is written so potential allies can kickstart their journey in 4 weeks. That means every day you should be working through this handbook and thinking about allyship. It's also important to document the journey, so you'll need a journal on hand before you begin. In addition to answering questions and completing actions, you'll use your journal to write down any challenges and address any feelings of defensiveness or anger. Throughout the book, you'll be given prompts about the materials. These prompts urge you to stop and think about the information and how you would react in certain situations. Each chapter introduces a new concept, followed by discussion questions and action items you must complete in order to confront your own racist beliefs. It's also imperative to find another white person as an accountability partner, so you can support each other and work through obstacles together. You'll hold each other accountable to do the work and continue the process. I also don't want you to burden or harm Black women with questions about any information or homework from the book. You shouldn't seek us out for assurances that you're doing the work correctly. That communication stays within your accountability relationship, or with white members of any anti-racist groups you join. Learning to become an ally takes deep processing on your part, so don't rush through this book. Otherwise, you won't have time to really digest the information. The White Allies Handbook is a practical guide that you can revisit and come away each time with new knowledge about yourself and racial justice work. I suggest purchasing, or borrowing from your local library, at least one other book about racism while you work through this handbook. Take advantage of your local library and its collection. Ask the librarian for suggestions about what you can read or watch. You also can search YouTube for documentaries, lectures, and films. Take the time to visit a museum or attend a lecture. Many college campuses have free events. Once you join an anti-racist group, you'll gather information from other allies and Black women. I'll talk more about joining a group later. The point is that you keep learning. If you want to educate others, you need a variety of resources you can recommend to them. Remember to use your journal to write down your thoughts and ask questions you want to explore later. The questions and actions at the end of each chapter will challenge you, and it will be easier to complete them with another white person who also has this handbook to complete their ally journey. If you can't find someone in real life, reach out through social media. You can have more than one accountability partner and join more than one affinity group. Make sure you're open to sharing your journals with each other and talking through your defensiveness. Remember that defensiveness and anger are just ways to deflect from your feelings of discomfort. Even though ally work is difficult, it will never be harder than enduring racism and living under the cloud of oppression. So when you feel this work is too much for you, remember you have the privilege to stop and go back to your comfortable life where you only think about yourself and your own needs. We don't have the privilege of disappearing into whiteness. We're stuck with white people and your insistence on telling us who we should be and how we should behave. Retreating because someone hurt your feelings is a lazy excuse for your unwillingness to change. In order to support me and other Black people, you must acknowledge and fight against your own racism. Your current mindset won't cut it. You've had your entire life to cultivate whiteness, and now I'm telling you to think in a different way. You can't always believe what you see in the media or what your family tells you about us. You've internalized those lessons. Now you must exorcise them. As you progress through this book, keep in mind that allyship is a lifetime commitment. My goal is to introduce you to tools you'll need to join the anti-racism fight and continue that fight for the rest of your life. Part 1. Listening and Learning. Week 1. Chapter 1. Starting Your Ally Journey. Recognizing and Unlearning Your Racism. Welcome to the first step in your most likely long and difficult journey. However, if you commit yourself to this process, you'll learn to become an effective ally. My goal is for you to be more than just not racist. I want you to become anti-racist. Someone who can no longer stand on the sidelines. Instead, You're compelled to occupy the front lines alongside me in this fight. Have your journal handy so you can write down any thoughts or questions you may have. Are you apprehensive? Excited? Take a few minutes to take a personal inventory of your feelings. You're not ready to stand by my side just yet. First, you must educate yourself about racism before you take a position on the front lines. Don't jump right into the work of fighting racism. I've had white women actually attempt to lead racial justice groups within months of starting their journey as an ally. This mistake ends up causing us more harm than good. That's because they rush into every situation, bringing along their white supremacist views and racist ideology. You can't fight racism if you don't really understand that part of the fight is within yourself. It doesn't make sense to start doing the work without understanding that you're perpetuating racism, and you've harmed black women. That's why it's important to take the time to understand what it means to be an ally. Ally is a title we give to you when we see you actively fighting against racism. Don't call yourself an ally until we say you're one. I've met white people who can quote every well-known book on racial justice and are well-versed in black history. That doesn't mean I can trust them. This work includes more than just reading books about racism. Allyship means action. What are some ways allies can take action against racism? We'll also discuss this later in the book. Remember, allyship requires doing the work necessary to help us fight for our freedom. Anything short of that means you're just a spectator, a lurker. A few years ago, my Real Talk moderators noticed most of the white women in the group weren't posting or commenting. This silence was unacceptable, so I decided to require that white women actively participate in the group. They needed to post and comment so they could learn. Taking part in conversations around race teaches allies the valuable lesson of how to support black women without taking up too much space. Knowing when your voice is so loud that it drowns out ours is an important lesson in allyship. We call this centering yourself. Why do you think centering prevents you from becoming an effective ally? The purpose of Real Talk wasn't simply to provide reading materials to potential allies. These white women needed to actually engage with each other and with women of color in the group so they can become accustomed to the discomfort of discussing subjects like racism, white supremacy, and white privilege. Even with my new rule, white women still wouldn't initiate or engage in any discussions, so I directed my moderators to remove any white women who hadn't commented in the last 3 months, 700 in total. I wanted to push the remaining white women into understanding that silence should never be the default option when learning to become an ally. Real Talk provided them with the space to ask all their questions. It also taught them not to burden black women with the harmful task of educating them. Although administrators and moderators, many of whom were women of color, did step in to educate when necessary, white women learned to ask other white allies to help them work through many of their questions. This allowed more seasoned allies to draw on their own personal experiences and teach newer allies. As part of your education, I want you to understand the history of racism in this country so you can more effectively educate other white people. I'm not asking you to take a college course or get a degree. You don't have to be an expert. You should, however, have a solid background on what racism is and how it affects every aspect of black lives. Really take in that history, even if it makes you uncomfortable. For example, we're taught that President Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863 by signing the Emancipation Proclamation. Yet these freed black people continued to work on the same plantations under the same conditions for generations. They still picked cotton from sunup to sundown. They still faced the same violent overseers. Black people couldn't just up and leave. Where would they go? We received only partial truths about slavery in school. Why was this history left out of our education? How do you feel knowing you weren't taught enough about black history? There's a reason why we're taught so little about racism in school. It's by design. If you downplay the history, then obviously black people are exaggerating the seriousness of it, right? The education you received in school convinced you that slavery ended long ago, and now black people need only work hard to succeed. It's as simple as that. I grew up learning almost nothing about black history. I learned about Harriet Tubman and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but nothing about Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, or Ida B. Wells. Years later, I sought out that education on my own. So many black women shaped this country, yet their accomplishments are rarely acknowledged in classroom curriculum. That's why it's important that allies know the accomplishments and sacrifices of black women in a country that continues to marginalize us. Take some time now to read about the 3 aforementioned women. What stood out to you about them? Why do you think you never learned about these black women in school? I didn't realize my own ignorance until years later, and I'm still discovering stories I didn't know. I can trace my family back 8 generations in this country, and yet that history abruptly stops with my enslaved ancestors. Black people helped build this country. It's our blood, sweat, and tears that allowed white people to amass fortunes they passed down from generation to generation. On the other hand, we have nothing to show for our painful past, other than a lost ancestry and continued oppression. Yet, we're the very ones to whom white people say, "Pull yourself up by your bootstraps." Once you read about the history of racism in this country and its lasting effects on housing, education, healthcare, politics, etc., you'll understand how little hard work has to do with white people succeeding and black people struggling. In 2020, the American Heart Association released a call to action focusing on the relationship between structural racism and healthcare disparities. The article states, "Structural racism inequitably limits opportunities for social, economic, and financial advancement, which in turn results in a complex interplay among race, social determinants, and health that has negative consequences." In other words, many black people are prevented, through racist laws and policies, from attaining the same goals as white people. The article also explains that even if black people achieve the same socioeconomic status as white people, healthcare disparities still persist. Earning a degree also doesn't mean we will be treated equally. Throughout their careers, college-educated black people are more likely to face unemployment and earn less than their white counterparts. In addition, racism affects the health of black people. We experience mental health issues such as depression and stress that, in turn, affect our physical health. Black people are more likely to be essential workers, which means during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were more likely to be exposed to the virus. Structural racism also prevents us from accessing quality health care. That means we have higher instances of pre-existing conditions, one of the reasons black people died of the virus at higher numbers. That's why I want you to learn about the history of racism in this country, and really think about the lives of black people. Compare our lives to your own. When you take a walk in your neighborhood, consider what could happen if I were strolling through that same neighborhood and you or one of your neighbors called the police because you didn't think I belonged there. You can't ever put yourself in our shoes, but be honest about the reasons you or your neighbor would make that call. We've seen it play out numerous times, sometimes with deadly consequences. If you can begin to understand the violence of your actions, it will help you when you actually start your anti-racist work. You can convey to other white people that their motives are based on their racism, and that racism might kill us. You'll begin to recognize when a situation could lead to violence if you or another white person makes a decision based on your racist beliefs. You'll know to intercede when these situations arise. A good understanding of racism also helps you converse with other white people. Without this knowledge, you won't know how to respond to many of the arguments you'll encounter from white people who make excuses for racism. Have you used any of the following responses? You insist that reverse racism is real. Reverse racism is a myth. Black people can't be racist. Racism includes the added characteristic of power. white people have the power to influence housing, education, quality of healthcare, etc. Black people do not. You say talking about race is divisive and actually makes the problem worse. White people have been mostly silent on the prevalence of race in this country, yet it's not getting better. You ask why everything has to be about race. Race is a social construct created by white people to seat themselves firmly on top. That's why it's up to you to defeat the institution white people created, and many of you still fight to uphold. An important aspect of this work is learning about the insidious nature of racism. Simply put, it's everywhere. What do you think racism means? Let's clarify its definition. Racism doesn't mean one person hating another person because of her race. That's prejudice or bias. You'll have other white people challenging you on what exactly racism means. What you need to understand is that racism encompasses a power dynamic that white people possess and that most minorities do not. Subsequently, Merriam-Webster changed its definition of racism to a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. A. Doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. B. A political or social system founded on racism, racial prejudice, or discrimination. This new definition includes its systemic nature. That means the racist systems in place create inequities, specifically for Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous people, in healthcare, education, housing, criminal justice, employment, politics, etc. Using these categories, think of some ways racism affects Black people. It's easy for white people to deny that there are inequalities because you choose to ignore them, or make excuses as to why you constantly come out on top. Anyone can find statistics supporting healthcare disparities. For example, Black women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. Black women get breast cancer at the same rate as white women, yet their death rate is 40% higher. Many Black women, including my sister, have stories of visiting a doctor only for their concerns to be dismissed or downplayed. Since her early teens, my sister suffered from cysts in her breasts. Over the years, she had dozens removed. The doctor told her that because of these cysts, she was at a higher risk of developing breast cancer. When she began getting mammograms, she also received sonograms to make sure there was no breast cancer. She was vigilant for 25 years. She never missed a mammogram. One day, she called me to say her breast didn't feel right. She got a mammogram to see what was going on, but they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They told her she was fine, but she knew something wasn't right. I suggested a second opinion. A few weeks later, she got another mammogram. The results showed she had stage 4 breast cancer, and the cancer had spread to her eye. We were devastated. The doctor said it was slow-growing cancer that probably had been there for years. The other facility missed the growth more than once. In other words, her cancer should have been caught much earlier. My sister went through chemotherapy, changed her eating habits, and fought as hard as she could. 2 years later, I sat at her hospital bedside holding her hand as she died. Let's talk about education inequality. Did you know that schools in Black and brown communities receive less funding and support than schools in white communities? In fact, non-white school districts receive a whopping $23 billion less than white school districts. How do you think Black parents feel sending their children to schools that are underfunded and underperforming? Visit any major corporation and see the paucity of diversity in its ranks and the ocean of whiteness at the executive levels. Mercer's When Women Thrive 2020 Global Report surveyed over 1,500 organizations with a total of 7 million employees. It found that white men made up 85% of executive positions, When you hear white people argue that other races simply refuse to work hard enough to succeed, don't believe it. The more you read and work with other allies, the better tools you'll possess to counter that argument with facts strongly.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?